Today I want to talk to you about defining maturity in your church. This is a big conversation that's mostly ignored in churches. They assume a lot about their people, they assume a lot about their leadership, they assume a lot about the clarity of their communication, but it's a huge, huge conversation in churches. The first point to think about is this: you either define maturity or you default to maturity. Everyone in your church has a different definition of what maturity is, what it means to be a mature Christian. And if you don't define it, they'll default to their own understanding based on their previous experience or based on their own reading and things like that. Unfortunately, you probably noticed in the American church that the top defaulted definition of maturity is simply knowledge. It's new ideas. And so these people who call themselves mature will come to the pastor and say, "Pastor, listen, you didn't give me new ideas. I'm not feeling fed. And I'm a mature Christian." And so my response has always been, well, first of all, if you were a mature Christian, mature people feed themselves, so you wouldn't need me to actually feed you in order to survive in your Christian life. But that's a different conversation for a different day. But the reason that they're saying this is because no one's told them that knowledge is not the ultimate level of maturity. I mean, think about it. Who were the most knowledgeable people in Jesus' time? It was the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they and Jesus didn't exactly get along. Jesus didn't think they were mature. He called them whitewashed tombs and other things. And I would say that maturity can't be the full, knowledge can't be the full definition of maturity, and so we have to define it differently. You can define maturity different ways. You can look at, in Luke chapter 2, it talks about Jesus growing in wisdom and in stature with God and with man, and so there's a physical side to maturity, there's a relational side, there's a spiritual side, there's an intellectual side, and you could talk about it that way. You could go to Colossians chapter 1, where it says that they were Paul's praying they would bear fruit in every good work and increase in the knowledge of God. They'd be strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, and they would be joyfully giving thanks. You could do it that way. What I would tell you maturity is embracing the character and the priorities of Jesus. However you define that in your church, I don't care, but what is the character of Jesus? What are the priorities of Jesus? Because we're being conformed into the image of Jesus, Romans chapter 8, verse 29, and so the character of Jesus is really important, and also obeying Jesus, following His commands, following the Great Commission, the priorities of Jesus need to be important to us. And so we had to think through it that way. However you define it, the second thing to do is now design a pathway to it and through it. In your church, for example, what does it mean to mature? If it means that, what does it look like what's the definition of a disciple person? What does it look like long term? What are the values that they have? What are the priorities that they have? What kind of character do they have? You may take a grid, I've always taken a grid of they need to know certain things, they need to do certain things, they need to become certain things, they need to see certain things, they need to relate in certain ways. Know, do, be, see, relate. You may take those and take the grid of their relationship with God, their relationship with their self, the relationship with their family, the relationship with their church, and the relationship with the world, and maybe create a grid of what are the characteristics of a discipled person. How do we define that for ourselves? You may want to try that, but design the pathway through your organization, through your programs of your organization. If you think that fellowship's important, you're probably going to push small groups, or you're going to push a discipleship relationship. If you think serving is an important part of ministry and of maturity, then you're going to push serving. If you think missions are, if you think prayer is, if you think devotions are, you're going to find ways to take this definition of a disciple person, this definition of maturity, and you're trying to insert it and make sure that your programs are leading people along the pathway to maturity. By the way, these pathways are always cyclical. No one ever arrives as a mature person, not in this life. And so you got to make sure that as you describe things, you want to make sure that you're talking about things that lead to something else. If there's no definite destination where you can say, I have arrived and I'm mature, you want to keep moving them forward to other things. For example, years ago, ours was come, grow, serve, go. And come was the weekend and coming to Christ and coming to a right relationship with God. Whether you were a Christian or a non-believer, you wanted to be right with God, and so the worship service was that. Grow was the small groups, relationships, iron sharpening iron, making sure you're in good fellowship and learning the Word together, going deeper into the Word of God. Serve was the next one, that you're not just focusing on yourself and your personal growth, but you're now giving to others, serving inside the church. And then go was the serving those outside the church, whether it's through evangelism or community projects or whatever, in order to invite them to come back and experience the weekend service. It was cyclical. Hope that makes sense. The last thing to think about is to develop a diagnostic of progress. People want to know that they're growing. They want to know what their steps are. They want to be able to diagnose where they are in order to figure out where they need to go. No one goes to a class about how to change a spare tire. No one goes to a class. They wait until the tire actually goes flat and they learn it on the job. And yet in the church we had the opportunity to help them diagnose before we prescribe. Years ago we were walking through the 40 Days of Purpose, and I created this personal growth program. It was a 5-part program. They had the 5 purposes of the church, outreach and service and discipleship and things like that. And I created 10 questions about each one of them. For example, discipleship, the first question was, I've given my life to Christ. The second one was, I've been baptized. The third one was, I'm in a small group. And I just did 10. I know how to study the Bible. I've memorized verses, but I put them in the order of progress, at least what I thought progress was in the Christian life. And people took this 50-question scenario, and I had them chart it on a circle where it had 5 parts of the circle, each one of the purposes of the church. And so it would look kind of like, if they were mature, it would look like a fully inflated tire. But if they had a problem in one area, that area would be flat. And I would talk about how you need to fix your flat tire. And so every 90 to 120 days, they would take this diagnostic to see where they needed to go. And the steps, the 10 questions in each one, were actually steps to take to move forward. So if they had never given their life to Christ, it was giving their life to Christ. If they'd never been in a small group, it was been a small group. If they'd never been discipled, they would be discipled. If they'd never been baptized, they would be baptized. But the idea was we gave them a diagnostic that actually included steps for them to take. Define or default, design a pathway, develop a diagnostic for progress. These things will help you define maturity in your church. This has been a Converge Whiteboard Leadership Moment. To learn more about Converge or to join us, check out converge.org.